Well, glory be and mercy me, we've done it yet again. Here I am walking through the graveyard. What's been banging around in my head? Recently I've come to accept that not everybody knows about what's going on in the neoliberal period. I think that's something I've had to conclude recently, where I get caught in my own sort of headspace, and I come to say, like, doesn't everybody understand? Doesn't everybody understand what's going on with the collapse of the neoliberal ideology, and this collapse and realization that everything is completely fraudulent and there is no credibility in the society? Oh, and it turns out, no, there's lots of people who either think that, oh no, this is fine, or think, well, something's gone wrong, but I'm not quite sure what. I see that a lot, actually, with the rise of the PPC, for example. Lots of people who are saying something's gone wrong, and they're trying to figure it out, and they're trying to articulate what it is that they think has gone wrong, but it's not actually rooted in a historical, materialist perspective. And so I thought, hey, what the hey? Why don't I make a video and actually talk just very briefly about this neoliberal period, why it has failed us completely, why it is a collapsed system, and the confusion that it has wrought on the society. So the neoliberal period begins with Reagan, Thatcher, and here in Canada, Mulroney, right? It is the capitalists' attempt to seize control of the economy back from the working class. That throughout the 60s and 70s, the American economy had adjusted itself in such a way so that workers actually did have a great deal of power. Unions were stronger than they are today by a great deal. Workers could expect to leave one job and get into another job at higher pay with a great deal of regularity. And what this was doing, of course, is it was forcing the capitalists out of the market. That it was an inevitability that the capitalists were no longer going to be able to control the means of production. That's central and key to all things. That they want to maintain control over what gets done and built and created, so that they can essentially continue doing nothing while we do all the work for them. And before the neoliberal period, they were losing control of this, right? That the workers were actually starting to grumble amongst themselves. Why do we have these capitalists again? What's the whole point? And so the capitalists do what vampires and ghouls do, which is they appeal to the base instincts of the worst elements of the society. Thus, the rise of neoliberalism begins. Statements like greed is good, right? The worship of money. That it's not about, it's not even about adhering to the American dream, right? The nice house, the car, the wife, the kids with just one job, that kind of thing. Now it's about the mass accumulation of wealth, right? So you've gone beyond even the simple desire of having a stable home where you can raise a family and have maybe a nice car. Now it's about infinite accumulation of wealth perpetually and forever ad nauseum. Amen. This rises the idea of what's been called colloquially, wow, whiffed that word. Anyway, but what's often called trickle-down economics, right? Supply-side economics. This idea was pitched to us as, well, if we cut taxes for the wealthy, right, then they'll turn around and they'll trickle the wealth down into the economy, right? This idea was propped up by intellectual frauds, complete total hacks, who are obviously paid by capitalist businessmen in order to espouse this idea. Since then, this concept has been peer-reviewed, right? Because they attempted to create mathematical models in order to justify the existence of such a thing as supply-side economics or trickle-down economics. These papers have since been refuted, have since been dismantled. There is literally no mathematical basis for the existence of something called trickle-down economics. It literally doesn't function. It doesn't work. It's like trying to build a car out of cotton candy, right? It's not going to work. You're going to have a lot of problems. And people are really going to start asking, like, why don't we build a car using metal? How about we build a car using science and reason and thought and compassion and empathy and all of the things that you need to have a stable society? So the precepts that back neoliberalism, trickle-down economics and all of this, are fraudulent. It's what led George Bush Sr. to call it voodoo economics when he was running against Reagan, right? Because even the most hard-nosed neocon, battle-ridden warrior types understand completely and fully that no, you need to have functioning systems and you need to base what you're doing on reason and logic instead of what has become neoliberalism is obviously a religious ideology, right? It's not an economic system. That's what's key and important and crucial to understand about neoliberalism and neoliberalism in this period, is that it has revealed itself to be fraudulent. We understand that it is fraudulent. It doesn't actually achieve the goals that it states it's going to do. Mathematically, it doesn't do that. And once you realize that it's not a mathematical model, that it's not an economic system, it never was, all that's left is that it is either a religious ideology, the worship of money, the worship of the accumulation of infinite wealth, all of these things, or it is simply a process to deceive a gullible populace so that the wealthy can just maximize the extraction of wealth from the society. This is what's leading to the mass confusion that we are experiencing today. That people still seem to think that there is credibility left in this neoliberal idea. Our current ruling class, that would be the liberals and the conservatives, and more it appears as though the NDP have been bought into that idea, are still attempting to move forward with neoliberal ideas, right? Things like austerity are part of this gambit of extraction, right? Because if the goal is to extract the most amount of wealth as you can out of the society, then you're never actually going to tax the wealthy. You're never actually going to confront capital. You're never actually going to do anything to prevent mass-scale collapses in your society outside of convincing the gullible rubes that what must be done is a further extraction process through austerity. Because that's what austerity is. It's extracting more wealth out of, instead of the private sector, the public sector, and trying to convince gullible rubes that extracting that wealth out of the public sector will result in economic growth. Terms like economic growth or even the economy in this period of time have to be reinterpreted. This lends to the confusion. In many ways, we're in a very, like the Tower of Babel period, where no one understands what one another is saying, that our language no longer conveys or communicates ideas in a concrete way we can all agree on any longer. And when it comes to economics, it's happened in fundamental ways, right? Like, if I say the economy, well, in a neoliberal context, that has to be reinterpreted to mean the wealth of rich people, right? The wealthiest people in the society, as far as the neoliberals are concerned, are, quote unquote, the economy. Forget about people, forget about individuals, forget about workers, forget about anybody else. If you have less than $10 million in your bank account, no one gives a shit about you at all. Period, full stop. You're not part of the economy in neoliberalism. This is completely indicated because the only thing that the neoliberals care about when they talk about the economy is the stock market. And the only people who are interacting with the stock market are rich people who have more wealth than sense, who don't actually participate by working or doing anything meaningful, who are just parasites, who have attached themselves to the side of the society and take their excess wealth that they've stolen from the work of the populace and jam it into some kind of market so they can slave trade with one another. And when this edifice collapses, no one in the society will truly notice. I mean, people will lose their jobs, obviously, because we're ruled by a death cult. But in terms of the amount of wealth you've accumulated, or in terms of any of these things, it won't change anything, because most people are not invested in the stock market. Most people don't have the excess capital required to gamble in a casino house that is erected and is called our economy. And it's this confusion, the confusion that's led us to believe that the stock market or the wealth of rich people is actually the economy, or is actually an economy, instead of just a religious ideology to justify a policy of mass wealth extraction from the populace, that is creating so much uncertainty and difficulty in the society, right? That economics is actually about answering a very simple question. How do you distribute goods, and how do you distribute scarce goods? What are the rules that make sense in society? What are the rules that are immutable and you can't avoid? And there are, in economics, immutable rules that you can't avoid. Here's one, for example. If you have 1,000,000 apples, well, you'll be willing to sell those apples at a reduced, reasonable sort of market rate, especially if the guy beside you has a whole bunch of apples, right? If you have one apple, you're not going to sell that apple for cheap. So the less you have of something, or the less of a thing that exists in a community or a market, if you prefer, the more expensive it becomes, or the more value it has, right? The more scarce something becomes, the more value it has. And that's a simple truism. So there's an economic principle that exists in our society. So how is neoliberalism attempting to take advantage of this? Well, the commodity that they're attempting to make scarce is money, right? They're trying to make it more and more difficult for you to get access to money, so that you will become desperate, so that you will accept worse and worse jobs for worse and worse pay, while the neoliberal death cult does nothing at all. They don't work, they don't provide value, they extract value. They're parasites. And the more and more you come to understand this, that the economic system that we have been operated under is not an economic system. It doesn't care about economics, it cares about looking like economics. The more and more you're going to demand of your political leadership to hire actual economists and people who actually understand how economics works, right? Few and far between, it seems, here in North America, because in North America you can go to a university or an institute of some kind and quote unquote become an economist or get an education, but you don't actually read any of the economists, you don't actually know anything about the subject, and you just keep vomiting out this tripe. Like if you've gone to the Fraser Institute, for example, right? People who have the Fraser Institute on their CV, on their resume, are illiterates. they sound stupid. They sound like morons. And the deeper you scratch on them and read their literature, the dumber and dumber they become. Because they're not economists, they're just acolytes in a religious institution. And here we are now in this period under Trudeau and Freeland, and neoliberalism has failed completely. This idea of trickle-down economics, this failed religious ideology that doesn't actually work, it doesn't actually distribute goods into the society, it doesn't actually help people, it doesn't actually maintain the system, it's unstable, right? And they know that this is the truth. Why? Because we're experiencing it. And instead of actually moving forward with economic systems, they're simply maintaining the strategy of maintaining the religious ideology to extract the maximum amount of wealth from the populace as they can. This is what people call going back to normal. I don't think we should, quote unquote, go back to normal. I think it's a bad idea to continue doubling down on a failed religious ideology that collapses the moment it experiences even the most minor amounts of pressure. Such as, oh, I don't know, a flu +1, right? A pandemic, right? Don't you feel like your economic system should be agile and responsive to such crises? Well, neoliberal economics can't do that because it's not an economic system. That even Keynesian economics is closer to the mark than what we're doing here with neoliberalism. We can do better, we should do better, and the first thing that we should do is expunge all of these neoliberals, all of these trickle-down economists, all this idea that, well, if you just give wealth to billionaires, then instead of offshoring it, they'll actually commit to helping people, which is total farce, and we can see that that's the case through figures like Bezos, through figures like Musk. Like, it's very obvious and straightforward. They're not interested. What they're interested in is extracting the wealth and escaping with it, which is exactly what's going to happen to us. Okay, I'm running out of rope here, so if you made it to this point, please like, share, subscribe, send it around, let people know I exist. My Patreon's down below, my music's down below. Please consider supporting leftist voices. Live stream 6 to 9 p.m. Come on in, cry about all this. Yeah, always remember, guys, you are a quantum being standing around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars to try to convince you that something else is going on. Don't let them. Good luck. We're gonna need it.